congregations. First of all, as you heard Dr. Dobine say, I have been involved in the academy. When I look at the time when I started as a tutor assistant for the theology department at Union Theological Seminary, that was in 1974, you all. So if you stop and look at that and look at the years in this work, the whole time that I have tried to relate the life of the church to the life of the academy and not create a condition where people would come to study and have study on one side and a commitment and worship to God on the other, and never the twain shall meet. In fact, in many ways, my inspiration for study is drawn from context and from encounter with people and being tutored by people who are not relating to you to get a grade. And that engenders a level of honesty, both about your person and what you're teaching and what you think you know, that will always leaving you scratching your head. But in some ways, the whole concept of convergence for me is foundational to thriving. Thriving can never occur where principles of fragmentation, separation, and hierarchical construction exist. I may say you may have a good working organization, and this is my own interpretive framework. But whenever you institutionalize in fragmentation based upon hierarchical differentiation, you are functioning in death. And even those who become a part of your life are soon invited to function in the powers of death. And what I would basically mean by that is that thriving is not possible because there is a fundamental sense of separation and a condition of existence where even within the life of the church, we do not respect, truly value, affirm, and relate to each other as persons having intrinsic value and worth, but they achieve their value based upon positions in the church, status in the church. And by that, what I mean is that thriving and flourishing always occurs within the context of authentic mutuality, reciprocity, shared value, honest encounter, and in a very real sense, a welcome space where you don't have to prove or gain value. When you enter into this space, you experience value. Thriving cannot be compartmentalized. It cannot be fractionalized. Dr. Dobines mentioned that I played football, and I also coached football on multiple occasions. And one of the things that I always teach the athletes I was called to lead is that you cannot be excellent on the football field and trifling in the classroom. Excellence cannot be compartmentalized and to say, oh, as a church, we're excellent in this area, but we're not excellent in this area. In order for thriving to occur, there has to be a comprehensive, pervasive sense of thriving in every dimension of our life. And what I mean by that is I cannot identify myself as thriving because we have an excellent worship service, but can't even have a quality church meeting. In other words, I can't just say I'm thriving here and I'm dying here and then say I'm thriving. It has to be it's comprehensive in every area of my life. I put it this way. I can't say, Dr. Bodobine said I was a great preacher. I know I'm not a great preacher. I marvel at preachers I'm privileged to encounter. But I do work at preaching, and working at preaching is really just trying to communicate with the people that I'm charged to pastor and lead. But I can't say, wow, we get great preaching. And but within that great preaching, the church is devoid of a discipling process where the people who hear the preaching are growing and learning how to apply it. So what I mean by that thriving is in every dimension of your life. And when you begin to recognize thriving as a comprehensive approach to the life of the church, I can identify something as thriving and then minimize or push to the side a place where I can be better. I put it this way. I use it in relation to even perfection. Perfection is never something possessed. It is always a goal pursued. None of us notice that thriving is a progressive form of a verb, which means that a thriving church is in progress. It can never absolutize or institutionalize anything that they're doing to the degree that whatever they're doing, being, or acting or functioning cannot be subject to review, question, and examination. I say it again. Excellence, perfection, thriving are not states achieved, but are goals and characters pursued. Because the minute you think you're thriving, you will soon stop thriving because you have absolutized your moment in the thriving paradigm to the degree that you're no longer committed to thriving because you have made a shrine out of your present location, achievement, and possibility. This is the amazing thing about God. Every time you reach to a place in God, the eternal tug will yank you beyond that place. I just read something this morning. I preached a sermon. I'm doing a series of sermons between Easter and Pentecost, and identifying all the things that happen between the resurrection until you got to Pentecost Sunday. And this morning's sermon, there's a point in there where it said some worshiped and some doubted. And I had to suggest to people that sometimes we condemn people within the faith who doubt. And you cannot judge, beat up, or even deny your doubts. Faith does not require that you have no doubts. Faith is activated by your doubts. And the greatest sin in your faith walk is to be so certain you don't ever have a doubt. Because if you're that certain, then you're not walking in a trusting relationship with God. You're assenting to propositions about God. And about this gets me in trouble, y'all. God does not want your belief in doctrines. God wants you to have belief in correct doctrines. God's desire for you is to have a trusting relationship where you are always in position to recognize the limitations of the doctrines you think that are correct. That will get you in trouble in a lot of circles. But I think God really wants the amazing gift of God is the call to trust. And so it means that by very nature, we are not a static institution. We're a dynamic community where we are thriving and striving to keep living in our thriving and never settling or absolutizing in a moment in our movement. Because whenever that code happens, we reduce ourselves to misdirected devotion and we love what we're doing more than we love God. And if you really love God, God will invite you to examine, to consider. And that's part of my joy right now in my own personal life is to love God enough to run the risk of being called an infidel. And that's what this thriving does. Now, one of the things that I would simply want to say about thriving, if you're serious about this, the first thing you got to recognize, you don't thrive by yourself. Thriving demands meaningful partnership. The bottom line is, who's handling the technology? Is that Timothy, Lucas, are you handling the technology?
Yes, sir.
The bottom line is, The way COVID has addressed things, it's going to even impact how we construct our future budgets, because we're going to have people on our ministry team who have skills and capacities related to the remote delivery of worship and
Yes, sir.
other aspects of the life of church. That's education, that's everything. Because one of the things is COVID is not a disruptive moment, it's a transformation moment. And if you've handled COVID well, you have enlarged the character of your community to the degree you can't go back and then disenfranchise people who have become a part of your community. You've got to think about, how do I maintain the community that we have built? And it may require an alteration in how we even construct budgets in order to support thriving, because that's one of the aspects is thriving. You always have to put your budget and your resources where you believe you need to make the investments to make thriving occur. Now, but what I stress in that, there will be partners, and I've come to recognize over the year, neither as a dean or as a pastor can you thrive without the presence of committed, trusting relationships with capable partners. And the minute that you cannot operate in meaningful partnership, death will begin to enter your community. I have to be able to affirm my own belief, and I got some of this from Denise Jansen. Uh, my own belief, you can't have a thriving classroom when you stand as the teacher over the class rather than participate as a learner in the class. My students teach me. Mm-hmm. And can I say this? The people I pastor also pastor me. The people I lead compel and inspire the thriving in the congregation. And there are ways that we can do a lot of things better. We're still learning. And that's another aspect of a thriving congregation. What? You're always learning. You're always learning. Now, what I want to do, and this is where I should have had a PowerPoint, what I did and went back in, I guess it's about 10 years now. Some of y'all remember. Y'all remember we did even many state conventions used Robert Schnazzy's book on the 5 practices of fruitful congregations. I just went back and looked at how current some of these things are in terms of thriving congregations. And you'll remember thriving congregations, what? Radical hospitality. Do you create a sense of welcome? Is there a kind of life where everybody who encounters your community feels like what? Welcome space. Do they feel alienated, or do they feel like they're coming into a community that ranks people based upon status or based upon categories like new members and old members? Do they feel this sense of radical hospitality? And you all could debate for years, so because many of you are much more versed in this and that. But in every study, even the things the things that Lilly have begun to do, there's another study that was done decades ago by then what was called the Alban Institute. The Alban Institute doesn't even operate it as it once did. But when they talked about transformed congregations, transform vital congregation, the number one thing they said, here it is, they are created and sustained by vital, authentic, quality worship that binds the people to God and to each other. I think there's one thing that we cannot neglect, that worship is essential to vital congregations. Now, the style may be diverse. You understand? Notice performance is not the characteristics of a thriving or vital congregation. Worship is. And so I think there is some need for us to reflect about what is the nature and character of worship. What does worship look like, and how much do we invest in worship at the atmosphere? So, look, hospitality. What is the second practice? Passionate worship. The third practice is intentional faith development. This shows about the commitment and quality of life. If you look at that Auburn Institute study, when it talked about that you have a effective discipling process, and it says what? When you become a part of this congregation, you come with an understanding that you're expected to grow. If you're a part of this thriving congregation, I don't expect you to be in the same place next year as you are this year. And the evidence shows that declining congregations are congregations that are stuck in a tradition, and all they do is repeat a tradition over and over again. And we invite people to be indoctrinated in a system to affirm that system, and any deviation from that system becomes a violation of the community, where they're suggesting that thriving congregations saying, this is where we are, but we expect you to grow with us. I've just looked I have to make reference as a pastor, okay? Just looked in our Bible study, looking at what are called those antithetical contrasts that Jesus presents in the Sermon on the Plain or the Mount, when he says, you have heard it said, but now. And the question is that a thriving congregation will always have a but now sense that God is not through. And yes, we know we've done it this way, but now. And the way that we but now does not require that we violate, surrender, or negate our tradition, but part of our tradition is that the God we met in our past is also the God of our future, such that the but now moment is not an abandonment of the faith, it is the demand of our faith. The illustration I would use, really now about 30 years ago in the congregation I pastored, you all got to understand what this was, a radical shift. It may seem minimal to you, but then we grew from a deaconesses who had a ceremonial, come on, take the cloth off, prepare communion and take the cloth off. And you wear white on Sunday and the deacons wear black. Well, we just did a years of teaching about God's design for co-regency, male and female co-regency, and looked at what creation said and not the fall said. And so we set apart women as deacons. And one of the women set apart came to me and said, Pastor, I'm scared. My grandfather will be turning over in his grave right now if he knew I became a deacon because I just usurped the authority of a man. Now, in my conversations with her, one of the things that I said to her, I believe your grandfather would be turning over in his grave if we were still living where he lived. Did your grandfather play the role that he played in our lives, in your life, so that you would be stuck? Or was his purpose to introduce you to a God that would have you growing for the rest of your life? I believe if we were doing the same thing that he was doing, he would be weeping and turning over. But I think today heaven rejoices. Can I say this? I know you're a 60-year-old woman. His baby is still thriving. Do you understand that you're still thriving? So in that sense, is how do we, a thriving congregation, you cultivate a reality Now, one of the ways that's critical to that is that you've got to be able to admit that you're growing. Sometimes in our leadership, we want to present ourselves as answer persons who are complete. And in order to have a thriving congregation, you have to be thriving in your own person. You have to be able to say, you know something, family? Can I share you where I've grown? Oftentimes in my own preaching and teaching, I'm not ashamed, and I'm older now. No, I ain't old, I'm older, I'm old, y'all. And I'm comfortable telling people, let me tell you where I once was. And I have to apologize. Just 2 weeks ago, I talked to them about how I was formed in sexism. And I was a nice sexist because I pedestalized women. But you were so pitiful you couldn't make it without me. No, no, come on. You understand what I'm saying? And I thought I was enlightened, but as I became enlightened, the more I recognized, even in my growth, I've come to recognize there's still a whole lot of area to grow. Classic example of this is for this country. Our country is in arrested development. Why? Because we are identifying our maturity with a limited moment in our growth. And so we build shrines to seasons of failure. Come on. So Aaron Dobines, is not that college student. So here he is, let me just say 50 years old. He doesn't need to go get him, he doesn't need to go buy a ragtop convertible, unbutton 3 of his shirts, and put a necklace around his neck, trying to recover. There's a point in your development, no offense, Aaron. There's a point in your development where you can recognize, I'm not where I used to be. And part of a thriving congregation and thriving individuals is that even as the leader, that I can acknowledge to them where I'm wrestling, where I'm struggling. And actually, this is my own experience. What I've discovered, when I've been willing to communicate to the people that I lead that I'm still in a growth process, they became excited about growing. And it engendered a level of honesty in our fellowship where people were saying, can I tell you, I'm really wrestling with this. And y'all excuse me if this blank word offends me. I'm not upset when somebody comes to me and say, Pastor, I'm pissed at God. I'm so mad at God right now. And guess what? I don't give a, well, praise God. Let's pray. No, come on, let's talk about it. And then guess what I have to do, y'all? I've had moments where I've had to stop and say, y'all, today your pastor is. And one of the things, like this morning, one of the things we talked about, the amazing things that it said that after the resurrection, Jesus appeared. The first point in the sermon was that Jesus appeared, but if you read the verses before, they start telling the lie that said he was dead and his disciples came to steal him. And I talked about the fact that sometimes the best way to refute the false narrative about your person is just show up. Just show up. Because the folk who think you shouldn't be here, just show up. But the thing was, and it says some worshiped, but then it says others doubted. And I argued that was the church was the Bible gave you some good news. Because since Easter last Sunday, some of us have gone through moments where we've had crisis of faith. And you're in good company. You are in the company of the disciples who walked with Jesus. But you know what the good news is? I'm using the good news, the Living Bible translation, not the Living, today's English version. In the midst of the worship, where some worship and some doubted, amen. Next Sunday, I'm going to talk about the bottom line is too many of us have identified worship with how loud we worship. Have you ever seen Seen a preacher say, I don't have any worshipers over here. And you're tutoring people that the evidence of true worship is how loud you're shouting. And some people are even being excluded from worship because they're not responding the way the cheerleader wants them to. In the midst of any worship, you're going to have doubters. But guess what the next good news is? It says, in the midst of a worship where some were doubting, Jesus drew near. What a word. When the church would consign you to hell, tell you that you've abandoned the faith, Jesus draws near. And that's good news for me, y'all. Then in those moments where I've had those crises, both intellectually and personally, to be able to tell somebody you're not abandoned, because if the whole church walks away from you, Jesus draws near. I literally had to cut it off because I preached. I had too much for one sermon, so I have to do part 2 next week. Because the outline was the appearance, the amazing, the assignment, and the assurance. But when I got into the amazing, it's amazing that you bowed, that it said you worship. But the word for worship there is not the word that is used in worship. It's used in the realm of politics and the empire, which literally says is, I no longer bow to the powers of this world. I no longer bow to the emperor. I have given somebody other than the emperor authority in my life. That's amazing. Now, moving on with this, I'm just trying to, the whole point of that is to show that thriving gives people room to grow. It encourages growth. It acknowledges the questions. And this is just my own opinion. I don't think we can thrive when we're enslaving. Listen, you may even grow a church, but you're growing a plantation. And I'm going to say this is oftentimes people are attracted to a plantation because it does not require faith responsibility on their part. So even though you may be growing, you are growing an oppressive reality that disenfranchises and victimizes people and puts them in the position of dependency rather than the discovery of the truth that sets them free. And that's you all get my own approach on it. Let's go back. You heard what? You heard worship. You heard radical hospitality. You heard intentional faith development. The fourth category is the practice of risk-taking, mission, and service. That is, that you aren't so insular, celebrating your worship, but you place yourself at risk for service. Do you know what that means if we took that seriously? Black Lives Matters movement people would love to be in church because they would not see us as the other. They would see us as those who join them in putting ourselves at risk for the sake of the mission of the gospel. I like those words, that reaching out and taking risks to both appropriate ourselves and resources to be agents of transformation in the world, such that we become partners with God and agents of the future who are existing to give people a foretaste of glory right now. One of the things I've discovered was the young people, particularly my young adult group, which y'all I'll let Denise tell you whether that's Z or which group they're in. But one of the things that I discovered They don't come to church when you were in the building. They don't come to church every week, but give them an assignment. Say, we would like for you all to do this. And you know when it really hit me a few years ago? Um, we were planning this thing and we were looking at how we were going to send this much money to help support a feeding program in Richmond because we're out in the country and we were going to support a feeding program. And one of the young women said, why are we sending money? Why aren't we going there to feed them? I said, in other words, it's what years ago when they talked about megatrends in the church, and they talked about the difference between uh, surrogate missions and hands-on. That we put ourselves out there, this risk taking, and my time is about up. So let me just quickly say, you see the fourth and the fifth practice, which really people picked up on, but turned it into prosperity doctrine. You know what it is? Extravagant generosity. That we're a giving people. We're a giving people. So just give. Don't ask. In fact, I don't teach tithing. I teach giving. Tithing is a legal prescription for people who don't know how to give. When you teach giving, it's a transformation of your heart, not a percentage of your pocketbook. And I'm talking about the Lord loves a cheerful giver. So therefore, I don't think about I'm gonna give 10%. I got in real trouble, and I think I give these 5 principles. Let me see what time it is. I don't know when I started, but I think it's time to stop. Because we were writing they were writing a piece about stewardship. When I submitted my piece, I talked about how we needed to start focusing on giving, and we needed to encourage some people not to tithe, but to get into a financial management and freedom plan. No, what I was saying is you got young couples that are in debt, and they are giving the credit card companies 15 to 25%, and you're telling them to give God 10%, right? And in a very real sense, they will give a credit card more than they will God. I said, why don't we develop financial management programs where we take some of these folk and we have enough givers where I will say to this young couple, I will give to cover your tithe. If you will join the financial management program, and in 3 years, we're going to have you out of debt. So you can start giving God 20%. So you can give. You understand? See, if you're in debt, you can't give as the God bless you because you owe your soul to the company store. And so I introduced stewardship as a stewardship program as a part of getting out of debt and how we help you do that. Now, I will be honest, we didn't get that many takers, but the principle I still affirm. And I'll still, every now and then, when I talk about giving, I will talk about the first part of your giving is to begin to get out of debt. Where tithing says, if you tithe, then God will take you out of debt. The Lord will supply. Mm-mm. Because the whole time you're asking the Lord supply, you're burying what God has given you. Just you understand? So I don't want to extend this, but when I talk about reaching the point of extravagant generosity, it's not a, can I just say this? For me, this is a moment of generosity. My friend, my colleague, and a young woman that I trust named Denise Jansen said, John, can you come? So generosity says, Yes. Not asking about what you're going to get, but Lord, if she believes I have something to give, I give. Now, so you hear those five principles. I don't have the time to go through what the Alban Institute, they had 12 principles. They even had a test that you gave to your church, and you ranked your church in each of these 12 areas between 1 and 3. What I liked about the test was at the end, you didn't say this is what we need to do. At the end, whenever you identified a place where you were not thriving, your response was, and this is how I am going to help us thrive. Not where you tell. So what I'm really saying, really was saying in conclusion, for me, those five principles help. And people ask me, are you saying your church is a thriving congregation? No. I'm saying we're a church that's pursuing it. And in order to achieve it, I've got to recognize there's some places that I can do better. You know what? There's some places where I just need to release it and let the folk who can do better be better. That's that whole principle of partnership. So I'm thriving, and anytime someone tries to helps me to see how I thrive, how we can thrive better. Just part of thriving is making room for the gift. And in Africa, there is a way. When I went to Africa, you know, like if I were to greet somebody, if I would uh, uh, to greet Cheryl, and I would say, I would say. She say, "How you doing?" I would say, "Oh, I'm doing good, man. You know, so and so." In Africa, I asked them, "How are you doing?" And guess what the response was? "My day is well, if your day is well." I can't have abundant life when you're suffering. And here's the reality. Do you ever notice in the church how there's almost a culture of people rejoicing when another ministry fails? Come on. And sometimes even another family. What happens? Your joy is my joy, your pain is my pain, and walk together, children, and don't you get weary. So these are just some musing of a pastor theologian as I try to seek thriving in all areas. I try to do it as a dean. I try to do it as a pastor. I try to do it in my personal relationships. And guess what? That's why every day I have to say, when I say my prayer, Lord, forgive me. A thriving congregation will be confessional and prayerful. And even the leader has to say sometimes, I'm sorry.